Hi, I'm Shauna, this is Shauna's World. Welcome back to my channel where I make videos about living intentionally. I share all things about hiking, travel, wellness, breathwork, running, fitness, whatever, and living an intentional life. So if that sounds like something you might be interested in, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. You can also follow me on Instagram at Shauna's World. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how I saved for an 8-month sabbatical. Last year and into this year, I took 8 months out of my job as a fundraiser in order to travel and hike and do lots of fun things. I've had a lot of questions on how I managed to do this, how I saved, how I planned for it. So I thought I'd put it all together in a video and share some of my saving tips and some of the lifestyle changes and side hustles that enabled me to save, to take such a long period off work, make sure I could cover all my bills back home and travel in the way that I wanted. I do also want to acknowledge there is a certain amount of privilege in being able to save this kind of money. I'm not saying it's impossible to do if you don't have that kind of privilege, but I also don't want to sit here going, if I can do it, anyone can do it, when I did have some opportunities available to me. I did make big sacrifices, but yeah, I definitely want to acknowledge that there is a huge amount of privilege in being able to save enough to take time off work and even to be able to not have the responsibilities of, say, kids. So I do acknowledge I was in a very fortunate position to be able to save and to be able to take that time, but I'm just sharing my reality, and if things resonate, great. If they don't, that's fine. I'm not saying this is the one way to do things, I'm just sharing my story. So I knew I wanted to take a sabbatical for quite a long time. The organisation I was working at the time had a sabbatical policy where once you'd been working there for 5 years, you'd be able to take up to a year off unpaid. I knew from pretty much when I started working there that I would want to do this at some point, but basically I wasn't very good with money. At the time I felt like I was existing just to pay my bills. I was living in a small flat that I was fortunate enough to own, and paying the mortgage and paying my bills was taking up all of my finances. And then if I wanted to travel, I would end up making poor decisions, impulse buying holidays, putting it on my credit card, and then slowly accumulating bits of debt. I was never in massive debt. It was just always spending a little bit beyond my means and always feeling like I was playing catch up. So I couldn't foresee how I was going to be able to take this level of time off work. And then a few years ago, I just wasn't having a very good time. Money was tight. I wasn't enjoying living in my flat. I wasn't enjoying that area. And I realised things just had to change, and I couldn't carry on living the way I was and really be getting the most out of life and living an intentional life. So I started by making quite a big decision, which is my number one thing that I did in order to save for my sabbatical and also pay off the debt, which was, it seems bonkers now I'm sharing it, but I bought a really small boat and lived on the boat and rented out my flat. So yes, this is where a lot of the privilege comes in. The fact that I had a flat that I was able to rent out was a huge privilege. But there was a lot of sacrifice involved. So I bought this tiny boat, had no shower, all solar powered, so it run out of power. But it enabled me to save a lot of money. It was on a very cheap mooring in a lovely area. And then I was renting out my flat, which covered the mortgage, the taxes, and any money for repairs. So I wasn't really making a profit on it, but it was covering its costs. And then my paycheck was just paying off my very small mooring fee, which at the time was £137.50 a month for pretty much all my living costs, a little bit on fuel, but mostly I was using solar, I was using water from the river to drink, purified. So that was a really great way of being able to save a significant amount towards my sabbatical. Now, this is a huge lifestyle choice, and I'm not saying this is something we should all do if we want to save for a sabbatical, but what I would say is usually our living costs are our biggest expense. But I actually wanted to live on a boat at that time, so it was perfect that it also saved me money. But I would say if there are ways you can reduce your living costs in any way, and I know particularly if you're living in London like I was, it can be tough, but things like living in an HMO, house share with lots of people, can give you a much lower rent. Or you can also look into guardianship, which is a form of getting cheap rent in order to kind of house sit buildings like schools and police stations and fire stations that have closed down, or office blocks. And that can be a really good way to live in a nice property and not pay that much rent. For some people, there's also the option of staying with family or friends while you save, but obviously that's another huge privilege to have family or friends supportive enough that are willing to let you stay at a lower rental cost than you'd be paying on the open market, and also having the relationship with family that you'd be comfortable and stable doing that. There's also sometimes opportunities to get cheap rent by, say, living with an older person who wants some help with chores, or finding a job where you have a live-in role, and those kind of things that can help you save a huge amount of money on accommodation. But I know not possible for everybody. So the second thing I did when planning the sabbatical and working out how I could afford it was working out exactly how long it could take. So my work sabbatical policy allowed a year off, but I realised it would just take me far too long to save up enough to cover all my expenses back home and to fund my lifestyle for a year off. And I wanted to go sooner rather than later. So I kind of compromised on how much I'd be able to save versus how long it would take. And I realised I'd be able to take probably 6 to 8 months off, and kind of was feeling into the budget and different things I wanted to do and kind of forecasting. And I kind of thought 6 months as things are, but 8 months might be possible if I was able to make a bit more money or kind of save beyond what would be the basic I would usually be able to each month. So the third thing I did that helped me save was really budgeting my everyday expenses and reducing expenses in areas I tended to overspend. So again, I recognise it is a massive privilege to be able to budget in a way that you're going to be able to save, because if you're not earning enough, you can't just budget your way out of poverty. I totally understand that. But if, like me, you kind of have enough but tended to overspend in certain areas, sticking to a budget was really helpful. So I gave myself categories for different things and allocated money for my sabbatical savings and then budgeted with the leftover. I massively reduced my budget on things like eating out and entertainment, which have been areas I kind of tended to overspend on or just enjoy a bit too freely. I didn't cut this out altogether because even though I can live without eating out, when I was living in London, it was really hard to actually maintain a relationship with your friends that didn't involve some form of eating out, because it's such a big city. Your friends often live an hour and a half away travel-wise, so it's not always practical to go to each other's houses. You're meeting in the middle, so you kind of have to get food on the go. But I did try and choose cafes over restaurants, or if the weather was nice, bringing food from the supermarket for a picnic. I also put away the money that I was saving for my sabbatical. I managed to budget about £800 a month that I could save, and then I would put that away on payday into a starling pot separately for my sabbatical, and then the rest was what I had to live off of. So the fourth thing I will share that I did was using my side hustle as a breathwork facilitator to save additional money on top of what I budgeted for from my paycheck. So when I started saving for my sabbatical, I was relatively new to being a breathwork facilitator, so I didn't budget for this. I didn't know how much I'd be making. Income was really inconsistent and still is. So some months I would make nothing at all from facilitating, but on my best month I got paid over 1,500 from it. So I did manage to save a significant amount from that side hustle, and because that was money I hadn't budgeted for, and that was all extra on top of money I was saving from my paycheck, that was a big portion of what took me from being able to take 6 months off to taking 8 months off and getting the most out of that time that I was able to take. So the fifth thing I did was just finding other little random side hustles and picking up any extra paid work where I could. So one thing I did was I got a freelance gig handing out flyers for a theatre, promoting their shows. I love theatre, so it was a great thing to do. I like talking to people. So I'd stand in the street giving out flyers. It was kind of pretty low wage, but it was 0 hours. I could pick up shifts pretty easily, but I didn't have to. So that was where I could do some extra flexible work. on top of what I was already doing. I also had some very occasional paid work advising as part of an ethics and governance board for a mental health organisation where I had lived experience of using the services, and basically I was there as someone with lived experience to advise senior leaders and provide a perspective at senior leadership level on how they were doing things and kind of give that patient perspective. And that wasn't very often, but it paid quite well for quite a little time and I enjoyed doing it, so that was nice. I also managed to get some paid work doing an advert for a production company, which is floating around the internet somewhere as we speak. And then probably the most unique thing I did to raise extra money was I sold my hair to a wig company. So I can't remember if I was vlogging when I had really long hair. I think I was. I was, and I used to have really long hair, and I read that wig companies pay good money for hair to make their wigs with, and particularly for red hair, and I'm a very ginger person, and it was really long and thick, and basically I sent photos and told them how much I wanted to cut off to different wig companies, and they sent me quotes of how much they would pay me for my hair once I cut it off. And I got £300 from it, and given that I wanted to cut my hair anyway, this was really, really good money. So I got it all cut off, sent it in an envelope to the wig company, and then they transferred me £300. So if you're ever thinking of getting your hair cut from long to very short, you have to have a really good amount of hair for them to make it worth their wig making, because I think a lot gets used in the roots. But it was a really interesting experience. I did also dabble a little bit with online surveys and user testing on websites, but I found that it was a lot of time and effort for not very much return. And it might be that if you have a huge amount of free time on your hands and you don't mind doing surveys, that it is worthwhile to do. But I really think you're getting pennies per survey, and it's very time consuming and boring, and it just absolutely wasn't worth it for me. And then the sixth thing I did that really made a difference to my saving was just general frugality. So I would get a lot of my food through the food waste sharing app Olio. It's a kind of community app where people post their food waste, things they have that are going out of date or they've got too much and are not going to eat, and then you go around, collect it, and it's a fantastic way of connecting with your community. It's also used by Pret and Tesco, so you sometimes get kind of industrial food waste and Pret sandwiches, which is great. And it was quite time consuming as someone who can't drive, because sometimes I'd be walking 5 miles to pick up a sandwich, but you would sometimes get a significant amount, and I really enjoyed the process. I saved a lot of money through that. And it was, a good way of frugality and obviously saving on food waste and the environmental impact of that, which was great. I was really intentional about my subscriptions. I did keep certain subscriptions, either ones I needed for breathwork or, for example, the gym, but I made sure I didn't have anything that wasn't really going to add value to my life. So I didn't have any TV subscriptions or music subscriptions, and that was fine for me. I made a point of really trying not to buy anything unless it was absolutely necessary, like something had broken and I really needed to replace it. And then when I did buy new things, I bought secondhand and continue to this day. And that's partly a frugality thing and saving money, but also so much nicer to use something that already exists. And then the seventh thing I did to help me budget for my sabbatical was when I was planning the trips and the things I was going to do, really trying to be as intentional as I could about my spending on the sabbatical and the travels and the gear and stuff. So for hiking the Israel National Trail, I didn't need loads of gear because I had, a fair bit already. But anything I did need, I bought secondhand. A couple of things I borrowed, and that meant I saved a lot on gear. And then for the bits where I needed accommodation, I tried to find a balance of booking the cheapest accommodation I could tolerate. I mean, I'm in my 30s now. I don't like staying in budget party hostels all of the time, but I stayed in budget hostels some of the time and then splashed out on occasional private rooms, because for me it's important to have alone time and integration and not be surrounded by people all of the time. And I think I got that balance well in the end, but I did probably overspend on accommodation in some areas because of that need, but I did factor in more budget accommodation than I'd have liked, just to save a bit of money along the way. And then the 8th thing that really helped me save, and it's probably not advice in any way whatsoever because we're out of that period, but I started planning and saving for the sabbatical during the COVID pandemic, during lockdowns, and my gym membership was frozen. I got a refund on my annual travel card to the office. I wasn't commuting to the office. I wasn't buying lunches out. Restaurants were closed, like activities were closed. So I was really able to save a huge amount on that, not having weekend trips or any of that. And then when lockdown finished and we came out of it, I'd kind of built some of those habits and realised just how much I could save by cutting out the things that I could live without. And that helped me to be more intentional about my spending in general. I was obviously really lucky that my work wasn't affected in terms of I didn't get furloughed or lose my job or anything. I worked for a humanitarian organisation that was very, very COVID focused. We were actually busier than ever. So again, I recognise a huge privilege that I was able to save so much during that time. And I know that doesn't help anyone now in advice after the lockdowns are finished. But yeah, just recognising how that made me be a lot more intentional with my spending. So I guess those are the 8 things that really made a difference for me. I know some of them are more anecdotal than useful, but hopefully you can take away something about spending more intentionally, saving more intentionally, and little tips that might work for you. I can't remember the exact period I was saving. I think it was about 2.5 years. And I was aiming to save about £18,000, which I know is a huge amount of money, but basically I wanted to save enough to cover my mortgage back home for the whole time I was away, because my tenants were not very good at paying rent. They were quite inconsistent. So I just wanted to make sure that was covered. So I had all the money for my travels and then all the money for my mortgage and like my mooring and bits back home that I had to keep funding. And there were times when I went over, there were times when I was able to save a bit more. But generally it was just quite an enjoyable process to be so focused on this thing. And I found it a lot easier to say no to things because I had this goal, I wanted to do this adventure, and I put that before the other opportunities that were coming up. And actually, since I've been back and got a new job and I don't have any massive savings goal in mind, I'm definitely finding I'm being a little bit more impulsive about my spending. So I want to get back a little bit to that mindset I was in when I was saving. Anyway, I think I'm going to end the video there. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been useful in some way, and even if it's not stuff you can directly copy or follow, some of it might be, maybe there's inspiration for other things you can do, and hopefully some of it is really directly useful. You know, maybe you want to sell your hair to a wig company. Maybe you do. But thank you for being here. I've enjoyed making this video. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have any other good saving or budgeting tips, knock it in the comments below. Thanks for being here. It's a pleasure as always, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.